On this week's Mailbag Monday, we are answering all of your mailbaggy questions concerning all things from Matt Waldron being a little bit overrated by yours truly, Luis Arraez allegedly being overrated by yours truly, some other things with the rotation, predictions for the regular season, Ethan Salas and Leodalis Vries, and a whole lot more. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Monday, February. I'm sorry, it's not February anymore. That was fast. It is March 3rd, Monday, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Those accounts have been admittedly a little bit quiet lately because I'm waiting for baseball. Then I can start doing the live tweeting and all that sort of stuff. So go check that out, guys. Also, go check out Just Baseball if you want my written work on Padres baseball and baseball in general. Today's episode, guys, we're doing the mailbag because it is Mailbag Monday indeed. And I'm excited. We got a lot of questions. That's what we're doing today, a bunch of questions. Because frankly, we are at that point of the offseason. We've been at that point, I'd say, for the last 2 or so weeks where it's basically just waiting for things to happen. Right? Like, there's not really a lot of new things that are going to develop. I know that there's still some free agents out there, your Jose Quintanas, your JD Martinez's, but for the most part, not too much right now, right? So that's what we're doing. Today's episode, guys, though, is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And everybody, of course, thank you for getting your Monday started with your first listen every day. We love that here at the Locked On Network because we are your first listen every day, folks. Look, there hasn't been too much happening in Padre land, and I've talked about like this as this being now my, I think, 2020, 2021, 22, 23, 24. Okay, with this being my 6th season, I get it mixed up sometimes. My 6th season now of covering the team. Spring training is more and more like I understand it more, and I understand some of the granular details that are important when covering it. But I also understand that largely there's not a whole lot to really react to in a way that like really makes an impact on things, right? Manny Machado could be batting 125, and I just don't care, right? Because this is just guys tinkering with things, getting into the mood, getting into the flow of things. And I think that I'm getting into the flow of things too, frankly, with doing episodes every day. Since we had the off-season mode, we were only doing 3. So this is a lot of fun, but we're going to answer your guys' questions, and it concerns a lot of different things. And we're going to start first with folks who responded on Twitter, because that's always what I favor first. For those who don't know, again, respond to me at Javipeno or at LO_Padres on Twitter /X. I usually put out like a mailbag prompt every like Sunday or so, maybe mid-afternoon. Around then is when I'm going to start posting them. But let's get into the questions, guys. I've been farting along for way too much so far. I don't know what's wrong with me. This is weird. But my first question is from Mr. @Ed Helsinki. If I could pull it up really quickly. He says, who's impressing and distressing so far in spring training? Any real big surprises in Padres camp? We're going to do a little bit more of a talk on this tomorrow. Just give up the latest like spring training notes and updates. So I'm going to save some of that, Ed, for tomorrow. So don't worry. And a whole episode dedicated to your question. And they say I do nothing for you guys, right? But no, in all seriousness, so far the basics that I've seen is, Matt Waldron had a really good start. And I think that Ethan Salas has been, not from like the overall numbers, it's not like he's hitting 600 or anything like that, whatever, but more just like people are really talking about like, wow, like this, you see the talent, I think is what it is. Maybe the results aren't fully there yet, but it seems like we've seen a lot of talent from Ethan Salas, which is exciting. And I really can't wait. I think that there's a outside chance that Ethan Salas can be really special, and that's so rare for catching prospects, for you to be able to get like one of those titans at the position instead of just guys who kind of are okay. It's obviously paramount to a team's success, but the Padres have not had good catching for a long time. I think the best catcher that they've had in the past like 10 years or so was probably Yasmani Grandal, right? And they ended up trading him to the Dodgers, and he was better there. And then maybe that one Derek Norris year. basically the best they've had. And then that one 2019 season, I think, from Austin Hedges, where he was just a defensive wizard and basically carried, even though his bat was awful, and then the defense paled behind a little bit. So anyway, that's basically it. So really excited about Salas, and I know that Tirso Ornelas has been showing some bat-to-ball skills too, which is really great. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But thank you, Ed, as always, for sending in your questions, folks. And when you send in your questions, you can @ me at both accounts. Padres, at @HavMania, you can DM me. I don't really care. Anything works. Whatever's best for you. At YPG with, I don't know what the full thing says, SK220OTD says, what's on your plate while you're watching opening day? Is what he asked. And I love this question. And I assume you're talking about like what I'm going to do, what I'm going to eat, all those sort of things. I will say it does depend. It does vary greatly depending on when opening day is. It is a Thursday this time. It is usually, during a weekday and whatnot. There's a couple things that I do. I kind of stole from a friend of mine. Shout out Rylan Stiles. He hosts the Locked On Thunder podcast, if anyone's curious. He has a tradition of watching Moneyball before opening day or on opening day every single year. And that's something that I've been starting to take up. It just gets you in the mood. I don't know what it is. It's just fun hearing about the team. The writing is so good, the music and all that. There's just, you feel baseball cultured. I don't know what it does to me, where I'm like interested in hearing the way Brad Pitt says the name Garcia as they're talking, 200K, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what it is about that movie. And obviously the bigger lessons of that movie are great too. And I've written about this actually for a website. You guys can check that out on my pages, but that's usually what I'm watching. And then for food, I usually don't do anything in particular. I might do like order some empanadas maybe this year. I might do that. Pizza is always a go-to. I know these are really boring answers, but I don't have a food just yet. You know what I mean? I feel like I should have a little bit of a food tradition. Maybe not something that's crazy, right? Because I want to, stay a little bit healthy out here. But I do think that would be a decent idea. It's just let's kind of come up with a food to have. But since it is Thursday, maybe I'll have some wings. I don't know. But I'm usually not like I don't think that I have to have, Cracker Jack and hot dogs and all that stuff. You know what I mean? I don't have to do the classic baseball snack, but yeah, I'm going to think about it. But I do know I'll be watching Moneyball, and I do know that I will absolutely be doing my best to have a nice little snacker for watching the Padres. It's going to be a blast. And I don't remember exactly what the schedule has been, but this will be the first one. I know last year the games were in Seoul, right? But we're going to have, in terms of being, in the States here, I think it's been a few years since the game hasn't been like a late night game when I've like already eaten. You know what I mean? So we'll see. But whatever happens, I'm excited. Thank you so much for the question. Good sir, YPG. Next question. And the last from Twitter is the Blue Goon Kevin at Blue Goon 82 says, as an outsider, which he's made very apparent. I know you, Mr. Dodger Man. As an outsider, what do Padres fans like about Preller, and what do they dislike? It's a great question. I think that what they like about Preller is, there's like funny answers and then real answers. Funny answers, just like, I love his demeanor. I love that this is a dude who makes some of the craziest, ballsiest moves, sometimes not good, and I think a decent amount of times very, very good, right? For a small market team, and he's like got this vibe and aura of being like not antisocial, but he's a little bit more introverted and making all these crazy moves and all. And then you hear him in an interview, like after he just trades for Juan Soto, like, yeah, and we just thought it was the right thing to do, and we got a good ball club out here, and it's about moving what we think is best for the team forward. And like he's so like monotone when he talks. He's like an oddball considering the moves he makes. You would picture someone being like really bright-eyed, or the Kevin Costner character, or Brad Pitt's portrayal of Billy Bean, like someone a little bit more, not assertive, but a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more like, wow, like, yeah, that guy is acting like someone who makes crazy moves and just big time blockbuster deals every 3 seconds, right? That's kind of what I like about Preller, is like the character, the mythos of him. And in general, I do think that it means a lot. And I think that this past offseason has shown that even when you do have some potential money in the bank and whatnot, I like that Preller is always prepared, and he's always like willing to do anything, right? The Orioles have shown that even when you do have like some new ownership, that sometimes the GM just gets really trigger shy. The Atlanta Braves were like this for a few years. Now, of course, the Atlanta Braves are a little bit better run than the Padres, but overall, I think that's what I like about him. In terms of what I don't like, I think sometimes what happens with Preller is he doesn't plan enough for the future, and I think that one thing that happens, and again, some people would argue Peter was like, or Peter Seidler, rest in peace, was like, hey, just get me whatever the best player is. I don't care about the money right now. And that's possibly what led to the Bogaerts deal. But I do think he sometimes gets a little bit caught up in the moment. Now, he's so good at scouting. He's so good at, the Nick Pivetta deal was huge for this team. He's so good at that stuff, but even still, sometimes he is his own worst enemy. And kind of like, you didn't need another shortstop. You know what I mean? You had Jackson Merrill. You have Leodalis, Vries. Like, you had Ha-Seong Kim, right? Like, you didn't need to pay an 11-year deal for a player. I think he gets a little bit, what's it called? A little bit too trigger happy at the wrong times. But I do appreciate his ballsiness and just the aura around him as a personality, that he does all these big moves and he's just this quiet guy. I mean, actually someone like told me, it's like, yeah, like the winter meetings, he just like is the same exact thing. So I love that so much about Preller. And no matter what happens, I think most people will be like, yeah, maybe he wasn't the best, maybe this and that. But all in all, I think he deserves a lot of credit for making just San Diego Padres baseball exciting in any form. So shouts to AJ Preller. Love you, dude. But we're not done, everybody. Of course we're not done. This is only one segment of questions. And we're going to get into Roundos in just a minute. But first, I need to take a second to talk to you about a few words from our sponsor. And ladies and gentlemen, you know what the sponsor is. You heard them at the title of this podcast. That is our good friends over at FanDuel. Folks, let me tell you, it's a good time to get in on the NBA action. It's just getting started. I know the All-Star game is done, but don't worry. We're going to have playoffs coming up. We're going to have teams fighting for seeding over these next few months. It's going to be great. And there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love it. It's very fantastic. If you want to just constantly bet the over on Luka Doncic numbers, maybe you could do that, because he is the bee's knees these days. He is what everyone's talking about. It's great. We love it very much, folks. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And just like that, everybody, we are back in segment number 2. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Padres your first listen every day, free and available on all platforms, and even potentially even more to come. That's what's so great about this show. Now we're continuing with this mailbag, everybody, talking about questions. We just talked about Preller. We talked about my favorite food that I would potentially go for, among other things. But folks, we are not done, of course. It is the always impeccable and the always reliable Ramamurdy9938. He says, love the insight that Michael Baumann brought to the show. Hope Merrill keeps thriving in 2025, and I expect him to continue to grow and shine. Yes, guys, that was one of my favorite episodes, frankly. I've done it in a long time. Michael Baumann, huge fan of his work from Fangraphs and formerly of The Ringer. Awesome guest. Did a really great breakdown and a great article on Jackson Merrill, so go check that out on Friday's episode. We're going to talk about Jackson Merrill, of course, for a long time. Believe you me, we will talk about Jackson Merrill. Don't worry, it's not like I'm saying we won't talk about him again, but that is a really, really great episode, so I recommend everyone checking it out. And question for Monday's show, should the Padres try to keep Arraez at DH and play somebody else at first, like Gavin Sheets or Connor Joe? Do they need to acquire a legit player at first base instead? Good question. I think that Arraez, they're going to use him the way that they kind of used him last year. Right, I think that what they're going to do is they're going to use him more as a DH. And then I think it depends on how they feel about Eguy Rosario. Is he a player that they want to sub out for Machado every now and then? Or is he going to DH some days? Is Arraez not going to play every day? I think it all depends, right? But I do think in general, I mean, if you were to look at Fangraphs, they are projecting Luis Arraez to play the majority at first base, or at least the majority of his time at first base, 60% of the time, and then Luis Arraez 33% or so at DH, right? And then Connor Joe being the next biggest one, 20% over at first base, because I really do think that they want to move over Jake Cronenworth a whole lot. And again, these things can change. We're going to see over the course of spring training, but in terms of like overall output, like I think it's been interesting where they've put guys in spring training so far. Like we've seen Hayward, obviously, we've seen Tirso Ornelas in left field, but we've also seen Eguy Rosario play third, second, and first. Like they're clearly trying to keep their options open, with the exception of a few positions, right? The only ones that we know are kind of a lock are like your catchers, right? They're not playing in the infield or anything like that. And then you've got Bogarts, Merrill, and Tatis. Other than that, I could see things shifting around. And then Machado at third base, obviously. I could see things switching around between first base, second base, and left field a whole lot. And I think that Connor Joe being someone who can play first base is probably one of the bigger reasons they signed him. So really curious to see how that goes. But all in all, I think it's going to depend on how other players are playing, right? And I think that if you can, it's not exactly the most thrilling platoon in the world, but if Arraez is doing well, right? If he's really, really doing well and you can count on him, and then Connor Joe, maybe you want to have both Arraez and Eguy in the lineup the same day, I mean, that'd be great. That would be great, right? Like, I think they're going to try and find ways to get him into the lineup because I know Zips really likes him for this year. They think he could be a 2-win player, which would be outstanding. And I do too. He has a little bit of a problem with facing righties, but even still, I think he's a killer. So I'm excited to see what Eguy Rosario is capable of. Folks, we're not done yet, though. At Drew Rockwell 8000 says, what is your predictions on the year for your Padres for regular season and postseason? And also, Padres will be good this year. Just don't know if they can beat the D-backs and Dodgers. I agree. So everybody go check out my predictions episode from last week for a bigger breakdown on all this stuff. But in terms of like the big bold thing, I did say one of my big bold predictions was that one outcome we haven't had this year is I think the Padres will be very good, maybe win 89 games, but I think they could miss the playoffs. I think that was like my bold prediction is we've usually seen great make the playoffs, historically bad choke job, miss the playoffs. And then, we keep vacillating between those two. I could see a world in which they're just pretty dang good all year, and it comes down to the last week, and maybe they didn't have enough wins or whatever, and that the D-backs and Dodgers were just better teams, and then you had the Giants being a little bit better, and maybe the Rockies being a little bit better, and you have the Cubs being a little bit better. I just think the National League is going to be a fight this year in a lot of ways. So that's just me. But go check that out, Drew Rockwell. At Jacob D.Y. Sart, 1524. Stay faithful, Javi. Connor Joe World Series MVP. I would love that, man. It's actually funny. My friends over at Just Baseball, Jack McMullen, who's now the radio play-by-play, by the way, for the Miami Marlins. Go say congratulations to him if you'd like. Tell him I sent you, too. He'll love that very much. But no, seriously, he has been like a Connor Joe fan forever because this guy has been switched around like a bunch of teams. I believe he had testicular cancer at one point. Like, this guy is a grinder and he's staying in there. So he's easy to root for in that respect. And it wouldn't, look, would that be like a David Vries-esque thing to happen? It absolutely would be. But the one thing I like about Connor Joe is he does have a decent eye. He knows how to take a walk. Not a great player, right? We're not like freaking out here, but stranger things have happened. It's just very, and this is part of my prediction I just mentioned. I would be very shocked if the Padres can once again get a huge winner for like $1 million off the waiver wire, the way they did last year with, give me a second, with Donovan Solano and with Jurickson Profar. That's just, it's very hard for you to do that 2 years in a row. But we'll see. We'll see, folks. We'll see. Now, just to praise myself a little bit, because I don't like always reading negativity, I want you guys to know I do see the positive stuff. At Koji_H says, as a newish Padres fan, this was an awesome episode. Learned a lot. All hail Niebla. This was my pitching recap that I did since 2019, so that was fun. And then at Shaggy_Do13, love the name. You need to be on a bigger show. Your energy and knowledge is top tier with the 100 emoji. I appreciate that. And Ron Murray, of course, says, no worries for being late on posting the episode. Life happens, so don't worry. Good episode and some good memories. Thank you guys for the compliments. I do like doing this every now and then because I do respond to weird comments, although I haven't been getting them too much lately. Because the Dodgers fans they're busy with their own thing right now. It's been a while, so it feels like they've been leaving me alone lately, which is very fun. But also moving on to Ron Murray again, let's hope the Padres let Salas and Vries get a chance to develop and not rush them up to the majors. Both of them are still untouchable players in my mind unless we get a chance to get a player who could help us win a World Series title. Could easily see the Padres maybe go with a 6-man rotation to help Darvish, Cease, and King not get too many innings. If not, then I'm rooting for any of the guys competing and those who don't get it, give us depth at AAA. I really like the versatility of the bench and think AJ and Schilt will get creative in who they choose. Excited for the season to start soon. LFGSD. I feel that, man. I feel that very much. I think that the rotation is a fascinating thing. And it's going to be a long season thing, right? I can see a world in which it's like, guys, the end of rotation guys, like, you're usually just hoping for guys that can fill innings and give up low fours ERA. That's usually what you're hoping for. That's like the dream outcome. So it's really important to remember that if guys aren't, an ace, or if they're guys that you won't be having on your fantasy team, that's okay. That's not like what their value is primarily predicated on. This stuff adds up though. Having depth in guys that can even just be good for 3 weeks, like, really helps you get through the season. So that way you don't have to have, the Padres avoided this last year because King and Cease and Darvish at certain points, and then you had some good value throughout with Matt Waldron, like, he helped you too. But there was a point when they had Adam Mazur starting games last year, and that is a good example of what happens when you don't have depth, where you're forced to use this Mazur fellow, and he's just getting torched. I mean, he had like a 7 ERA, and I still think the kid could have some potential, but he was getting torched. But the Padres had kind of no choice at the time, because I believe Darvish and Musgrove were hurt. Waldron was just starting to come into it, so it can be rough sometimes, but it matters. It matters. And I am fairly confident that they can find a fifth starter to be good, as I talked about on my pitching history episode last week. But folks, we're not done. We're at the nearly 21 minute mark on today's show, guys. But before we end our questionnaire, answering your guys' questions, we just need to take one more break to hear from our sponsors. And we're back here, everybody. Final segment of the Locked On Padres podcast. Not gonna lie, if I repeated myself there, it's because my recording got weird and I don't know exactly where it stopped. I started speaking into the camera and realized that I was paused this whole time. So my apologies if I'm repeating myself. But next question we talk about haters, on the show. There aren't many. I love you guys very, very much. I just want to address one by the name of Mr. Hope Springs Eternal 2624, only because I think there is a good discussion to be had here. He says, someone else should be doing this podcast. 97.3 The Fan is worthy of podcasting about the Padres. You are not. And I must say again, most compliments that everybody leaves are positive. Like Stephen Crawford and Koji_H responded to this saying, at least he's trying. At hashtag Let's Go Javi was great. Thank you very much, guys. You don't need to defend me, but I appreciate it. And Hope Springs Eternal basically is like, he's calling Arraez overrated. That's an insane take by Javi. He won the batting title again last year, his 3rd time in 3 years. He was playing with a torn ligament in his thumb and in extreme pain. His comment is cruel and wrong, referring to mine. Do you not have any mercy in your heart? Javi does not, certainly does not. The Padres probably would not have gotten to the playoffs without Arraez. He goes on to say, as someone said, stop hating on him. Him being me, Javi, shout out Rama Murdy, who pointed out in the comments, and they said, I am not hating on him. I am calling him out for saying Arraez is overrated. That this is sick. Arraez got his 3rd batting title last year while playing in extreme pain. So here's the fun thing about people who don't actually know how baseball works, is that, like, you can't just keep saying batting title, and ignore everything. I want to just reframe one more time for people who care to listen about my Luis Arraez take, is that I don't like using the term overrated in general. I just find it to be tacky. I find it to be devoid of meaning sometimes, because it all depends on the subjectivity of where are we placing Arraez, right? I only think Luis Arraez is overrated, or can be overrated, because sometimes he's talked about in mainstream circles. If you go on MLB Network and you watch a lot of the old heads, they're like, this is an elite level player and all that sort of stuff. And that's when I do think he gets a little bit overrated, because he doesn't walk, and because he doesn't play a lot of good defense. I don't mind the singles. I love that he's a batting title champ. And I have defended the fact that, and I talked about this with Alex Williamson a couple weeks ago, about his article on Luis Arraez and the correlation between batting average and winning baseball games. That the bottom line, and he had a really great article. I recommend everyone go check that out at Bat Flippin' Nerds. But he basically was like, this is a really needed player. On top of just being a change of pace guy, it's really cool that you have this guy who every year for the past 4 years, forget the batting average, he's an above average WRC plus guy. He's a 106 at worst, and he was a 106 guy with a torn ligament in his thumb last year, right? So if he's a 130 guy, and he's shown that he can be that over and over, there's no reason to suggest that Arraez still can't be the singles machine that he always is and always putting the ball in play. He's a good player, but because of the aforementioned defensive struggles, because of the fact that he doesn't walk enough, that is why he gets a little bit of slander, and I think it's all the product of how people rank him. If he wasn't viewed the way that some people view him, which is they just only look at batting average, and they think that in the year of 2025 that's all that matters, then he becomes a little bit overrated. But again, it depends on your standing. If you're just like, great player, man, he gets a lot of hits, gets on base for the guys, he's a menace at the plate, you can never strike him out really, then yeah, he's a good player. But when we're talking about elite, when people are like, well, 20 guys you could start a team with, I want the guy who always gets on base like Arraez, that's when the thinking can be a little fraught with just naivete. Or I should sorry, ignorance, I should say, actually, is the problem with Luis Arraez. And also, yeah, he's not the reason the Padres made the playoffs last year. Like, he was a huge piece. Don't get me wrong, he's not nothing. But it's also worth noting that last year, Luis Arraez, in terms of his total wins above replacement, he ranked behind guys that you probably wouldn't expect, like Kyle Higashioka. Right, he ranked behind him in terms of wins over replacement. He ranked behind Xander Bogaerts, who only played 111 games because Bogaerts played some really low-key, really good defense at second base. Jake Cronenworth he ranked behind, right? You wouldn't expect that. Ha-Seong Kim he ranked behind. And then you get Tatis, Manny, Profar, Merrill. But the big things that also have contributed to the Padres last year were Higgy being a great catcher, was Donovan Solano being a 118 WRC plus guy who also constantly just hit really well, and hit for a modicum of power and had some doubles in there too, for basically nothing. And then Jurickson Profar. If there was a real player that I could go back and be like, that was what really put them over the top, it'd probably be Jurickson Profar, just because you got him for $1 million. You got a 4-win player for $1 million. That never happens. Actually, what was he? Yeah, he was a 4.3-win player. And Jackson Merrill's breakout. Those were the things that brought the Padres to the playoffs, not Luis Arraez. That's a little bit hyperbolic. So that's just my explanation, finally, of Luis Arraez. As long as you're not putting, if you're not placing him in elite category just because of batting average only, no, he's not overrated. He's a very good player. And I'm excited to see what he does this year, especially with, as he describes, a fully healed new thumb and all that stuff. So really excited to see how that all goes. But moving on to the last two comments on this episode. Now, here's a fair thing, and it somewhat has to do with Arraez. At Friars394, speaking about batting titles and not mentioning Gwynn's 8, tied for most in NL with Honus Wagner, is criminal, he says. And you know what, Friars394? You are correct. I messed up. Last week we were talking about just predictions. Some of them bold, some of them not so bold, heading into this next season. And I talked about, Arraez winning his 4th batting title. I wanted to be spicy and say that he'd win his 4th batting title with his 4th consecutive different team, implying that he would be traded. I didn't want to go that direction. But yes, I didn't mention Tony Gwynn. I should have. I mentioned that I was trying to keep it just to players of the modern era of baseball that he would be tied with, because Honus Wagner and a bunch of other players, Ted Williams, they have like 12, and the game has changed so much that it's like almost unfair to compare batting titles won now versus batting titles won back then. But all in all, I still should have mentioned Tony Gwynn for the Tide, like you just mentioned, with Honus Wagner with 8. So my apologies, good sir. You are right. Last question, though, of the podcast comes from my man, Johnny Cage, 1057. Johnny Cage, man. Used to be my main at Mortal Kombat 9. Shouts to him. But the last question, he says, how can you be excited over a pitcher that has a career ERA of 4.76? Of course, I assume you're referring to Matt Waldron. And the reason I'm excited for Matt Waldron is, I actually wrote about this in an article last year for Just Baseball, that his sweeper and knuckleball combination when he's hitting the outside corners is actually really deadly. He gets a huge whiff rate on the knuckleball, even if sometimes he gives up some hard hit stuff, and he gets basically no hit rate and barely anything that is touched by batters when it's hitting the outside corner of his sweeper as well. If he's able to master that in a little bit, maybe if he develops a little bit more of a pitch, I just think that this guy can be really effective at points. He was a big reason. And by the way, my excitement is not that Matt Waldron is certified stud, that this is going to be an all-star or anything like that. My excitement with Matt Waldron is that he's an important piece. Like I was talking about earlier, where like you're just not getting through a season if you have to rely on Adam Mazur types, right? Because Adam Mazur is just clearly just a circumstance of we don't really have anyone right now. Jake Arrieta, Vincent Velasquez a few years ago. Rich Hill in 2023. You don't want to be in those positions. So if Matt Waldron can come in, if he lowers that ERA to a low 4, and he can do that for a lot of the year, that is really big for this team. And he gets a decent strikeout rate. And also, I do think that saying career ERA of 4.76 is a little bit misleading, only because, well, he hasn't really had a career, right? Like, this is a guy who only appeared a little bit in 2024. In 2023 with the Padres, where he pitched 41 innings and he wasn't very effective, but he still had 4.35 ERA, could be worse. And then in his next full season with the Padres, or at least full-ish season, in 146 innings, he actually had a FIP of 4.26. So it does suggest that his 4.9 ERA was a little bit bloated. And there was a stretch last year when he was excellent, or at least very, very good, considering that Dylan Cease was struggling, Michael King hadn't yet fully developed into what he ended up becoming towards the end of the season, and Yu Darvish was also not very good, and the bullpen was a little messy too as well. That last year, his ERA in June was a 2.45, and then the month before that, 4.15, month before that, 4.35. Everything went to hell after that. 4.97 in July, 10.35 in August, and that's why he got sent down. I'm just saying that, like, there was a stretch where if you give me those numbers, 4.3 in March and April, 4.1 in May, and then you have your good month sprinkled in 2.45, that is what you ask for out of a fifth starter. And he's got a unique combination with the knuckleball and sweeper after you're facing high heat guys like Dylan Cease and Michael King, and then you've got really great control guys like Yu Darvish, and then Nick Pivetta also could be a strikeout artist this year with that amazing repertoire of his own, especially with the horizontal break on his sweeper, that I think, having to face a Waldron, that could be tough for teams. It'll just add up, and then maybe someone else will come in. Maybe if Waldron explodes again, then you can hope on Stephen Kolek being good. You can hope on Randy Vasquez being a little bit better. Kyle Hart, maybe. They know what they're doing with him. All of that. That's why I like Matt Waldron, for his role. I like him for his role. Not because I think he should be taken high in fantasy baseball drafts, right? But all in all, that is my thinking, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my apologies if I repeated myself over the break. I paused the podcast at one point, and I can't see when I'm in the middle of recording what I already said. So if I had repeated some things, my apologies. But that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, guys. The only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javapeno, JAVIIPENO. Feel free to send me all of your questions and comments to have them possibly answered in the next mailbag segment. Ooh, Mailbag Monday. It'll come eventually. We'll talk about that. In terms of future episodes, tomorrow we're doing a spring training kind of update breakdown. Not just things to look for, but just the latest news and notes. Right, just going to talk about some of the things that we've seen so far. Probably wax poetic about Matt Waldron again. And then Wednesday episode, old buddy of mine, Mr. Millard Thomas, is coming on the podcast to talk about players that we're all keeping an eye on for the National League this season. Not just players on our teams. And they won't just be like, oh, I'm keeping an eye on Jackson Merrill. No, it's going to be like fun players that I think everybody should keep an eye on that are a little bit low-key. We'll be talking about that from every team, National League, and NL West, whatever. That's going to be a lot of fun. And the request for Mr. Jeff Snyder of Locked On Dodgers. It's in, folks. Locked On Padres, Locked On Dodgers crossover. We might get it. That's what the rumor mill is saying. It's possible. We'll have to see. But until that next time, everybody, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.